Good morning. My name is Truth Akins. I'm here to present you with my clear action research. The purpose of my clear action research is to understand student empowerment. I'm seeking to understand if students feel more empowered in discussions by using the KWL strategy. What do you want to know? What do you want to learn? What did you learn? Strategy. To start off the class that way with what do you know about, and then say the content subject um, versus the traditional instructor-led class that starts with taking notes, and the instructor starts kind of unloading information, and students are the receivers, and the conversation's going from instructor to student and student to their notebook. And if that later on, when you ask students to share in the discussion, will they be ready to share? Will they feel comfortable sharing? Or will they feel more comfortable sharing if it's a KWL? What do you know? Students respond, their response are up on the board, and so on. And so later on in the discussion, they'll be more comfortable to open up exploratory talk of their lived experiences at the beginning of class. So the problem is class discussions are a wonderful way to engage students in exploratory talk. However, the instructor may start the first part of class talking to the students, then the latter part of class asking the students to talk to each other. If they have challenges in identifying their role in a classroom, do I talk now or am I supposed to be quiet now? Am I a good student? Good student equals quiet student. Talking equals disruptive student. And so discussions may be challenging if the students are have a little bit of anxiety or anything when it comes to sharing, just based on traditional education from the adult learner's perspective and the last time they were in a traditional classroom. And so looking at that, the literature review suggests that Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages of development. According to Erikson's theory, students form expressions of identity or identity role confusion during adolescent school age years. And so in the classrooms, if the students' last interactions with teachers were to be quiet and to listen and take in information, the traditional structure of schools, then that may have conformed their identity a certain way. For now, they're adults and they're in community college. Could be for the first time that they have taken a class since they got their GED or their high school diploma, which sometimes they receive those GEDs and diplomas inside of an incarcerated environment and still may receive it in the same format as traditional education. And students, even students who are outside of the incarcerated setting, may still receive their education in a traditional format. But the goal is to encourage exploratory talk and to empower students with and learning their knowledge and themselves and from their peers. So according to Erikson's theory, students form expressions of identity or identity role confusion during adolescent school age years, which includes plans for the future versus overly hostility to authorities, challenges adult authority versus overly obedient, tends to be self-accepting versus tends to be self-rejecting. And so sometimes students may have these psychological social challenges when they're called to share with each other or share in a classroom setting. There may be a problem there because Erikson in 1952 explained that the students aged 12 to 18 develop an understanding of their role in the social world in regards to a sense of self-identity. And the self-identity so far and other literature have noted that students face disempowering interactions with teachers as young adults and teens, such as student labeling, zero tolerance policies that have removed students out of the classroom and into an incarcerated environment. Student expulsions and high school dropouts have been very disempowering to student learning. Also, school to prison pipeline in the U.S. has been documented by Miner and Wynn and other researchers. Teachers lack power in decision-making involving disciplinary outcomes, creating what Miner calls the school to prison pipeline, that the only way to discipline a student is to send them out of the classroom, expulse them, expulsion or suspension, and then they're out in the public view. The police pick them up, and then they are off to prison because they are outside and they're teenagers, and they can identify. The police have many reasons where they could charge teenagers for things, especially if they have high gang activity in their neighborhood. Furthermore, research shows the systemic incarceration created single-parent homes, which left a decrease in parent participation in the classrooms and unsupervised children at home. So we're still looking at young people who could have identified a certain way, and now they're adults in community classrooms, and you want them to feel less anxiety in the classroom. You want them to share. You want them to know how to have a voice and express themselves, because they may become instructors, professors themselves, and they should have their own voice. Also, Brock and Brecken 2019 explain how incarcerated women begin their pathway to prison during their school years in urban public schools. A qualitative study documented stories from incarcerated women from school in which students felt disempowered and lacked a voice. And so, predominantly our environment now is male students, but women students are also included in this. My study only included male students, though. Interventions that I did was I did a KWL as a warm-up to start the class. So in the first 5 minutes, there's 5 photos, and students will look at these 5 photos, and I'll say, what do you know about this particular photo? And they have a graphic organizer to answer in, where it says, has a particular box that is supposed to be marked. And so it's already kind of aligned with the photo of what we're learning. And I can change the graphic depending on the content. And then the vocabulary is on the graphic too. And so after I ask them what they know about it, we go through vocabulary. And then I ask them, what do you want to learn about this? And so I try to use content that would relate to something I really want them to learn about. But they're going to be noticing like, oh, this makes me think of this. And then they are the ones to say that particular thing that I want them to learn, but they feel empowered because they're the ones who said it, not me. And so we do, after we do the KWL warm-up, we'll do a group reading, reciprocal reading. So they also have a chance to read and break up the reading with a group and then present it as a group, what they read to, and everybody else has to take notes from what they are saying was in the reading. And then the exit slip to get out of class is, what did you learn? And so that's the intervention. So here's like an example of the pictures I would give them. What do you know about the Bill of Rights? And then here's a photo of We the People. You know, they could say, oh, Declaration of Independence or Constitution, or they could say, I know we have a judicial system. I know that we have a executive system. I know there's a Congress. You know, they just try to remember things usually from high school or what they've learned about themselves going through the court system. So this is an example of the graphic organizer. Here's picture 1. Put an X by the world. This is for a class that's doing history. So this, instead of social, political, economic, cultural, it would say a First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, Fourth Amendment. And they'd have to put the picture in whatever amendment it goes with, or it could be articles up here for the Constitution, or it could be a lot of different things. So this is the graphic organizer that's similar to what I would use. And then later in these boxes, we'll put the vocabulary down these columns in the rows. So if this was First Amendment, there would be some First Amendment vocabulary here. Or if this was about the articles, then there would be vocabulary under the articles that we would go over before we start discussions. So 5 minutes, 2 minutes to write, 3 minutes to share. Students view photos and write what they know about a topic. Next, they share with their neighbor. Lastly, a short discussion with us, and we go through vocabulary and what do you want to learn. And so I always present some of the academic language with the vocabulary. So language for discussions. Here's the sentence frames that I give. If you're going to state an opinion, you're going to say, I think this because of that. In my opinion, from my perspective, we're using I statements, and we're not going to say, we're not going to talk back to anybody in a way that is saying you, it's going to be more like, I feel this, I feel that. I completely agree. I also agree. I don't agree. What should we say about this? What do you think makes sense here? So they can just go over this while we're working in a group. So we review these academic terms, student review language for academic discussion, for academic collaboration. Next, we assign groups if they're not already in groups. And then we have our lesson and we do our reading. And then at the end, we have our discussion. So impact on student learning, observations. Observation 1, using the K and the W. What do you know? What do you want to learn? What do you want to know? What do you know about American law was our first one. And I observed students' responses and interactions. I wrote the students' responses on the board at first, why they're in the first few minutes, why they're shouting out different things they know about American law. We did a compare and a contrast on the board together with our book, and our book only spoke about Canadian laws because I wanted them to think of American laws and see the similarities, but I wanted them to be the ones to mention the American laws and come up with them from their peers, and then we can read over them, and then we'll verify what they think for long-lasting learning to add meaning to their learning. So I asked, what do you want to know? And students would say, I want to know more about American constitutional laws. Why are we using Canadian books? They were more engaged in why we didn't study American laws because our book covered Canadian laws, even though the laws are similar, except for some language. So I'm showing them where the roots of our laws come from, but at the same time, they're curious about where's the American law and what is it? Students were very engaged in learning the Bill of Rights. That's the what did you learn? One student suggested that we do a narrative and then apply the law to the narrative. They wanted to hear a story, and they wanted me to say, like, well, what if this happens? Then how would this work out? That's what they wanted to know, and they wanted to apply it to their own selves too. So I said, okay, next class we will do a case study with a scenario and a task card. So that was great for students to say how they wanted to learn. It really gave them the empowerment of saying what they wanted to learn versus I'm telling them a way that they're going to learn. On the next observation, we did the KWL strategy. We started off with, what do you know about state laws? And so now I want them to know the difference between federal laws and state laws. And in the relation to this case study, which I now brought them a case study, students had read the case study and reviewed the vocabulary, and students shared what they wanted to learn without me asking. So now it's moved beyond me asking them, what do you want to learn? Students started now just feeling a little bit more comfortable to say, well, I want to know this and I want to know that. And that's very good. That's very, very great. That the room is not quiet and I'm not guessing of what they want to learn and what's important to them, but they're telling me this is student-led learning. Students shared in 3 ways. First, back and forth from the teacher to the student. So first they were looking towards me and asking me questions, and as I was writing on the board, but then later I would pull someone's comment that's on the board and say, oh, look, so-and-so said this. What do you think about what he said? And then they would start talking to each other. So from student to student, and lastly, from student to teacher, they started telling me what they wanted to learn, and that's really great empowerment. The other observation number 3, I said, what do you want to know about case law? So now we're seeing the difference between federal law, state law, and then case law, and how case sets precedents in some situations. And we look back to see which case had precedents. So one student said, this is better than using a book. They're really interested in these case law stories because the case law is about real life. And so I had to use laws that were not in California from different states. And so they're all interested, like, oh, different states have different laws and things like that. So the conversations were very well. Students were having such an open flow of conversation and discussion during the discussion period after the reading. The times I didn't want to stop them because they were learning a lot from each other, and they really saw how much life experience they had that made this really interesting. So another observation I did, what do you know in relation to this case study? And so I asked them if they've heard of this particular case, and I brought up a case study, and they responded with the vocabulary we had been using. They kept on using the vocabulary and speaking in academic terms. They took ownership of those words. So at the beginning of class, to share about recent case studies they saw in the media. And 2 individuals started discussing present-day cases, such as the case of Breonna Taylor and no-knock warrants. And they wanted to look at the laws on that. The case that concerning Kyle, a gunman that had opened fire during one of the protest, a case in Wisconsin, and a case in Texas about a police officer who had went to the wrong house and shot someone who was sitting on their couch, and they thought it was their apartment. And so we covered those, but they had brought them up and they started this conversation. And so they see how much knowledge that they had just from watching these cases and following cases on TV. So for my next course, we talked about the evidence. This was a class about evidence. So we talked about the evidence there and things like that, and other legal aspects of evidence. But this is mostly talking about student empowerment. I made a list of 3 cases in order to prep my Canvas for next semester. So I already knew cases they were interested in now for next semester. I know what they want to learn about. And so that was really helpful. The takeaways, that this was building community. This learning went way past the first class, this class, and it goes beyond the classroom to future classes. And they all may talk about things after when they're watching TV together. Takeaway 2 is a safe space to speak, building an empowerment and voice. They became very vocal in the content area that we were talking about and how it pertained to their lives. So the takeaway 3 was they shared personal journeys between each other. Some of them kind of looked back at me, but for the most part, they stopped looking at me and started talking to each other, which is really good because that's what we want students to learn from each other. It creates like a school family. Takeaway 4, like I said, they had looked at me for guidance, but then they began to look towards peers within the discussion groups, which lowers anxiety by voicing opinions, which is really great. Takeaway 5, peer-to-peer learning, enjoyed learning from others, which can build trust and suggesting ideas. So creativity and innovation, discussing ideas of how could we solve this issue that we see in the world. That is amazing. Recommendations, I would say recommendation 1, use the KWL strategy. It's very simple and it's very nice flow in a classroom to say, what do you know about a particular thing? And you can set it up in a way where, you're just presenting something they relate to and you want them to actually bring up the actual content and the questions that you really want them to answer. You can guide it with an essential question. So this can create the beyond the classroom and future classroom learning. Recommendation 2, use content that relates to what you want students to know. I just said that, so that builds empowerment. Okay, so that's number 3, allow students time to learn the vocabulary before discussing. That's very important that we went over the vocabulary on the board after I said, what do you know about this particular thing? And then I threw their responses up on the board. Then I had a set of vocabulary words on the board also that we would go through before we would go any further. So we front loaded the vocabulary, which lowers anxiety around voicing opinions if they know how to voice their opinions. And then they had the vocabulary sheet that had the sentence fragments on there. Recommendation, try to let students find answers in their group so they will begin to look toward peers to support peer-to-peer learning versus giving them individualized tests and quiz. Let them find the answers together, giving them a section to read per group, and then that group has to share out to the rest of the group what they learned in the reading while the other group is taking notes from them. And so enjoy learning with others, which can build trust and suggesting ideas and creativity that you're going to get respect from your peers. You're not going to say, oh, that was a stupid question or things like that, because the discussion's flowing very well and you already told them how and they should talk to each other. And so that was my clear research for 2022, 2023. My name is Thelma Akins. My first name has been changed to Truth. It was Thelma Ruth and now it's Truth. So thank you. And this has lasted too long. I don't know how to cut this video down to 5 minutes. What am I going to do? Thank you.